On my birthday, my daughter-in-law looked around the room and said, "We should start measuring her for the casket while she's still here." I left my own party in silence. The next morning, I canceled every mortgage check. But let me start from the beginning, because what happened that night was just the tip of an iceberg I never saw coming. I'm Margaret, and at 68, I thought I understood my place in this family. 3 years after losing my husband Robert, I had convinced myself that organizing my own birthday party would bring us all together again. Maybe it was foolish hope, but I missed the sound of laughter filling our dining room. The house had felt so empty since Robert passed, and I kept thinking that if I just tried hard enough, maybe we could feel like a family again. I spent 2 weeks planning everything. I ordered David's favorite prime rib from the butcher shop downtown, the same place where Robert and I used to buy special cuts for holidays. I made sure Jessica's gluten-free requirements were accommodated. Before we continue, comment where you're watching from and subscribe to the channel. We'd love to see how far our stories are reaching. Even driving to 3 different stores to find the right ingredients. I bought those expensive Pinot Noir bottles she always hints about wanting to try when we pass them in the wine store. The house sparkled like it hadn't since Robert's funeral. I even used my good china, the set my mother had given me 40 years ago that I'd been saving for special occasions. I wanted everything perfect because I needed it to be perfect. I needed to prove to myself that this family could still exist without Robert holding us all together. David and Jessica arrived 45 minutes late. No apology. No explanation. David barely looked up from his phone while Jessica surveyed the table with that expression she gets when something doesn't meet her standards. You know the look, like she's smelling something unpleasant but trying not to be obvious about it. "Mom, you really went overboard," David said, finally pocketing his phone. "We can't stay long anyway. Jessica has that early yoga class tomorrow." My heart sank a little, but I forced a smile. "Of course, honey. I'm just happy you're here." And I was. Even their reluctant presence felt better than eating alone again. The dinner started quietly enough. I asked about David's work at the accounting firm, tried to engage Jessica about her latest interior design project for some wealthy client in the suburbs. She answered in clipped sentences while scrolling through her phone under the table. I pretended not to notice, the way I'd been pretending not to notice a lot of things lately. "How's little Emma doing?" I asked, hoping to find safer ground. "Is she still taking those dance classes?" "She's fine," Jessica replied without looking up. "The classes are expensive, though. Everything is expensive these days." I knew what that meant. It was the same tone she used when hinting about their mortgage payment, their car insurance, the preschool tuition. All things I'd somehow become responsible for over the past 2 years, though I couldn't remember exactly how that had happened. David shifted uncomfortably. "Mom, about that mortgage payment. The bank called today and said it was late." "Oh, I'm sorry. I'll take care of it tomorrow. I always took care of it." That's what I did. Then Mrs. Patterson from next door stopped by with a birthday card. She's been my neighbor for 15 years, and we always check on each other. Sweet woman, though she talks a bit too much sometimes. Since Robert died, she's been one of the few people who still treats me like I exist. "Margaret, what a lovely party," she said, admiring the table setting. "You always make everything so elegant. Robert would be so proud." Jessica looked up from her phone for the first time all evening. "Oh, it's nothing fancy, just family dinner." The dismissal stung, but I smiled anyway. "Would you like to stay for cake, Helen? I made chocolate, and there's plenty." "That's sweet of you, but I don't want to intrude on family time." Mrs. Patterson smiled warmly at Jessica. "Well, family is everything, isn't it? You're so lucky to have such a caring daughter-in-law. Margaret, not everyone gets that kind of attention in their golden years. My daughter lives in Seattle, you know, and I'm lucky if I hear from her once a month." That's when Jessica's face changed. Something cold flickered in her eyes, and she set down her wine glass with deliberate precision. I'd seen that look before, usually right before she said something that would leave me feeling small and stupid. "Actually, Mrs. Patterson," Jessica said, her voice taking on that sweet tone she uses when she's about to say something cruel, "we were just talking about how we should start measuring her for the casket while she's still here. You know, to make sure we get the right size." The words hit the air like a physical slap. Mrs. Patterson's smile froze on her face. David didn't even look up from cutting his meat, as if he hadn't heard anything at all. Nobody laughed. Nobody said she was joking. Nobody told her that was an awful thing to say. The silence stretched until it became unbearable, like the moment between lightning and thunder when you know something terrible is coming. "Well," Mrs. Patterson whispered, clutching her purse tighter against her chest. "I should probably head home. Happy birthday, Margaret. I walked her to the door on legs that felt like they belonged to someone else. My face felt frozen, like I was wearing a mask that didn't fit properly. Margaret, Mrs. Patterson whispered when we reached the front door. I know, I said quietly. Thank you for coming. When I came back to the dining room, Jessica was explaining to David why they needed to leave early. Her voice perfectly normal, as if nothing had happened. The traffic will be terrible if we wait much longer. And you know how I hate driving in the dark. David nodded, already reaching for his jacket. Thanks for dinner, Mom. We'll call you next week. They left without helping clear the table, without saying happy birthday again, without acknowledging what had just happened. Jessica didn't even look back as they walked to their car. I stood in my dining room, surrounded by the remnants of a party nobody wanted to attend, staring at the empty chairs. The prime rib was barely touched. The expensive wine sat opened but abandoned. Even the birthday cake I'd made from scratch remained uncut. 68 candles melted into colorful puddles of wax. For the first time since Robert's funeral, I cried. Not the gentle tears of missing someone, but the harsh, ugly sobs of realizing you've become expendable to the people you love most. I sat in Robert's chair and cried until my chest ached, until my throat was raw, until there were no more tears left. I cleaned up slowly, each dish a reminder of how foolish I'd been to think this family still existed. As I loaded the dishwasher, Jessica's words echoed in my mind. Start measuring her for the casket while she's still here. Not a joke. Not an accident. A message. The next morning, I sat at my kitchen table with my checkbook and a cup of coffee that had gone cold an hour ago. I stared at the monthly bills I'd been paying for David and Jessica for the past 2 years. The mortgage on their house, $2,400 a month. Jessica's car payment, $650. The private preschool for little Emma, $800. The utilities I somehow got stuck paying when they said they were between paychecks. Jessica's credit card that she used for emergencies that happened every week. I'd started helping when David said they were struggling after Jessica quit her job to become a full-time mother. Just temporarily, Mom, until we get back on our feet. That was 24 months ago. 24 months of writing checks while Jessica bought designer handbags and David talked about taking a vacation to Italy. My pen hovered over the first check. Then I closed the checkbook and put it away. If I was already dead to them, then maybe it was time to start acting like it. But what I discovered over the next few days would prove that Jessica's cruel comment wasn't just meanness. It was part of something much bigger, something that had been happening right under my nose while I'd been busy trying to keep this family together. Something that would force me to choose between being their victim or their worst nightmare. 3 days after my birthday disaster, David's phone rang while he was using my bathroom. He'd stopped by to check on me, though I suspected it was really to see why his mortgage payment was late. The bank had already called twice, and I could hear the tension in his voice when he mentioned it. I heard his phone buzzing from the kitchen table where he'd left it next to his car keys. The screen lit up with Jessica's name and a photo of her smiling face. The same fake smile she'd worn when she made that horrible comment about my casket. Without thinking, I glanced at it, and that's when I saw the text preview that made my blood run cold. Did you talk to your mom about speeding things up? We can't wait much longer. My hands started shaking so badly I had to grip the edge of the kitchen counter. I looked toward the hallway where I could hear David washing his hands, the sound of running water mixing with the pounding of my heart. Another message appeared on his screen. The lawyer says we need documentation of her decline. Start recording conversations. A third message popped up while I stood there frozen. Remember what we discussed about the house. Once we have guardianship, we can sell it and move to the suburbs. Guardianship. The word hit me like a physical blow. They weren't just talking about my death. They were planning to have me declared incompetent while I was still alive. When David came back, I was sitting exactly where he'd left me, hands folded in my lap like the dutiful mother I'd always been. My face felt numb, but I managed to keep my expression neutral. He grabbed his phone without looking at it, but I saw him quickly scan the messages. A flicker of something passed across his face. Guilt, maybe, or satisfaction. I couldn't tell which. Everything okay, Mom? You look pale. I managed a weak smile. Just tired, honey. Not sleeping well lately, which was true. I hadn't slept properly since Robert died, but it had nothing to do with mental decline. He nodded absently, already checking his messages more thoroughly. I watched his face as he read them. Saw the way his jaw tightened slightly. He was planning my life, or the end of it, right in front of me. Well, I should head home. Jessica's making dinner tonight. He kissed my forehead, the same perfunctory peck he'd given me since childhood. Call if you need anything. The irony wasn't lost on me. Call if you need anything, while he and his wife plotted to take away my ability to make any decisions at all. After he left, I sat in my living room staring at the family photos on the mantle. Pictures of David's wedding, where I'd walked him down the aisle because Robert was already too sick to do it. Photos of little Emma's first birthday, where I'd paid for the party because David and Jessica were going through a rough patch financially. Christmas mornings where I'd played Santa Claus to Jessica's ever-growing wish list, buying expensive gifts I couldn't afford because I wanted to see my granddaughter smile. Speeding things up. The words churned in my stomach like spoiled milk. What exactly were they trying to speed up? My death? My descent into incompetence? My complete financial surrender? I'd been paying their bills for 2 years, thinking I was helping my family through a rough patch. David had been so grateful at first, hugging me tight and telling me I was saving them. Just until Jessica can go back to work, he'd said. Just until I get that promotion. But Jessica never went back to work, and David's promotion came and went without affecting their need for my money. But apparently, I was just taking too long to die. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the mortgage payments, the car insurance, the preschool tuition, Jessica's credit card bills, all those checks I'd written while Jessica complained that I was holding them back from their dreams. David's agreeable nods when she suggested I was getting forgetful lately. The way they both seemed to watch me sometimes, like they were waiting for something. Now I knew what they were waiting for. By morning, I'd made my decision. If they wanted to play games with my mental state, I'd give them a game they weren't expecting. I called the bank first. My hands were steadier than they'd been in days. I need to cancel some automatic payments, I told the representative. My voice was calm, clearer than I'd felt in months. Certainly, Mrs. Hayes. Which payments would you like to cancel? All of them going to David and Jessica Hayes on Maple Street. I rattled off their address, their account information, everything I'd memorized from 2 years of writing their checks. There was a pause. That's quite a few payments, ma'am. The mortgage payment, car insurance, and several others. Are you sure about this? I've never been more sure of anything in my life. I'll need to verify your identity and get written confirmation for changes of this magnitude. Of course, I'll be in this afternoon. Next, I called the insurance company. David's car was under my policy because it was cheaper that way. Or so Jessica had convinced me. Funny how their cost savings always came out of my pocket. I'd like to remove a vehicle from my policy, I told the agent. Which vehicle? Mrs. Hayes? I gave him David's car information. The policyholder is moving out of state, I lied smoothly. The vehicle needs to be on their own policy now. Then I called the preschool. I'd been paying Emma's tuition directly because Jessica said it was easier than them handling it, and she was already so overwhelmed with everything. I explained that the payments would be stopping at the end of the month. Oh, the administrator said, sounding surprised. Should we send the bills to Mr. and Mrs. Hayes directly then? That would be perfect. They'll be taking over all financial responsibilities for Emma's education. Next was Jessica's credit card, the one I'd stupidly agreed to guarantee when she said she needed it for household emergencies. The emergencies turned out to be spa treatments, designer clothes, and expensive lunches with friends. I'd like to remove myself as an authorized user and guarantor, I told the credit card company. That will require the primary cardholder's permission, Mrs. Hayes. Then I'd like to dispute the charges for the past 6 months as unauthorized. There was a longer pause. Ma'am, that's a serious allegation. Are you saying someone used your card without permission? I'm saying I never authorized charges for cosmetic procedures and luxury handbags. I thought this card was for household necessities. By noon, I'd canceled every financial tie I had to David and Jessica's life. The mortgage payment that was already 3 days late, the car payment that was due next week, the insurance that would expire at the end of the month, the phone bill I'd somehow gotten stuck paying when they claimed their credit was temporarily damaged, even the utilities I'd been covering when they said they were between jobs. It felt like cutting chains I hadn't realized were binding me to the bottom of a lake, but I wasn't done. If they wanted to document my supposed mental decline, I needed to understand exactly what they were planning. I drove to the library and settled at a computer terminal in the back corner where no one could see my screen. I spent 2 hours researching guardianship laws, reading horror stories about families who'd manipulated elderly relatives, learning about the signs that courts looked for when determining competency. The pattern was always the same: establish financial dependence, document supposed confusion, present evidence of poor decision-making, petition for guardianship. They'd already achieved step 1. I'd been financially supporting them for 2 years. Step 2 was in progress. Jessica's comments about my forgetfulness, David's suggestions that I see a doctor, their conversations with neighbors about my decline. Step 3 would come when I stopped making payments, and they presented it as evidence of my impaired judgment. But they'd made one crucial mistake. They assumed I was the confused, helpless old woman they'd been painting me as. 2 days later, David called. I was ready for him. Mom, there's some kind of mix-up with the mortgage. The bank says you canceled the automatic payment? I was sitting in Robert's favorite chair, looking out at the garden we'd planted together 30 years ago. The roses were blooming beautifully this year, Did I? Oh, honey. I've been so scattered lately. What mortgage payment? I could hear the careful patience in his voice, the tone people use with children or invalids, the one you've been making for our house for the past 2 years. I let confusion creep into my voice, though inside I felt clearer than I had in months. Have I been paying your mortgage? That doesn't sound right. Why would I be doing that? Because we discussed it. When Jessica had to quit her job, remember? I'm sorry. David, I don't remember agreeing to pay your mortgage. That seems like something I'd remember, don't you think? I paused, as if trying to recall. Are you and Jessica having money troubles? Maybe you should talk to a financial advisor. Another pause. Longer this time. I could practically hear him thinking, probably wondering if I really was losing my mind or if I was playing games. The beauty of it was, he couldn't be sure. Mom, are you feeling okay? Maybe you should see Dr. Morrison, just for a checkup. I feel fine, sweetheart. Maybe you should call the bank and sort out whatever mix-up this is. Banks make mistakes sometimes. That afternoon, Jessica called. Her voice was tight with barely controlled anger, but she was trying to sound concerned. Margaret, what's this about the car insurance? They're saying my coverage was canceled? Was it? How strange. I don't know anything about your car insurance, dear. You've been paying it for 18 months. The concern was slipping, revealing the anger underneath. Have I? That doesn't sound like something I'd do. Why would I pay for your car insurance? Don't you and David have jobs? I could hear Jessica breathing hard through the phone. When she spoke again, her voice was saccharine sweet, but with an edge that could cut glass. You're playing games, aren't you? This is because of what I said at your birthday party. What did you say at my birthday party? I don't recall anything unusual happening, which wasn't entirely a lie. Nothing unusual had happened. It was just Jessica being her normal, cruel self. You know exactly what I said. I'm afraid I don't, Jessica. But if it's important, maybe you could remind me? I'd hate to think I missed something significant. She hung up without another word. That evening, I sat on my back porch with a glass of wine, the expensive bottle I'd opened for my birthday and never finished. The garden Robert and I had planted together was in full bloom. The roses he'd given me for our 40th anniversary were climbing the trellis he'd built with his own hands before the arthritis got too bad. For the first time in 3 years, I felt like I could breathe. For the first time since Robert's funeral, I felt like myself again. My phone rang. David's number. Mom, we need to talk. Can we come over? Of course, honey. When? Now. We're in the driveway. I looked through the front window and saw their car sitting in my driveway, engine running. Jessica was in the passenger seat, arms crossed, staring straight ahead like she was preparing for battle. David was gripping the steering wheel so tight his knuckles were white. They thought they were coming to intimidate a confused old woman into resuming their payments. They thought they could manipulate me into agreeing to a competency evaluation that would give them control over my life. They had no idea they were about to face someone who'd finally remembered what it felt like to have power. I smoothed my dress, checked my reflection in the hallway mirror, and went to open the door with a smile that didn't reach my eyes. David, Jessica, how nice to see you both. What happened next would determine whether I spent my remaining years as their victim or became something they never expected, their worst nightmare. David and Jessica sat on my living room couch like they owned the place, which, according to the conversations I'd been overhearing, they thought they soon would. Mom, we're worried about you, David started, using that patronizing tone I'd grown to hate. These mix-ups with the payments, forgetting our arrangements. Maybe it's time we talked about getting you some help. Jessica nodded solemnly, playing the concerned daughter-in-law. We've been discussing it, and we think you might benefit from someone coming in a few days a week, to help with bills, medication reminders, that sort of thing. I tilted my head, blinking slowly like I was trying to process their words. Help? But I managed just fine on my own. Do you, though? Jessica leaned forward, her voice gentle but her eyes calculating. You canceled payments you've been making for years and don't remember doing it. That's concerning, Margaret. David pulled out his phone. I think we should call Dr. Morrison, set up an appointment for a cognitive evaluation. A what? I let my voice quaver slightly. Just some simple tests, Mom, to make sure everything's okay up there. He tapped his temple. I watched them exchange a look, a quick, satisfied glance that told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't concern. This was a strategy. I suppose if you think it's necessary, I said quietly, though I feel perfectly fine. After they left, I sat in Robert's old chair and thought about that look they'd shared. It was the same look Jessica got when she found a designer dress on sale. The look of someone getting exactly what they wanted. That night, I did something I'd never done before. I called my neighbor, Mrs. Patterson. Margaret, is everything all right? It's nearly 10 o'clock. I'm fine, Helen. I was just wondering, has anyone been talking to you about me? About my health? She paused. Well, now that you mention it, Jessica did stop by yesterday while you were at the grocery store. She seemed very concerned about you. My stomach clenched. Concerned how? She said you'd been getting confused lately, forgetting conversations, repeating yourself. She asked me to keep an eye on you and let her know if I noticed anything. Unusual. I see. And have you? Noticed anything unusual? Honestly, Margaret, you seem fine to me. Same as always. But Jessica seemed so worried. And David too when he called this morning. David had called her too. What did David say? He asked if I'd seen you wandering around confused, or if you'd seemed disoriented when we talked. He mentioned something about you forgetting to pay bills, making concerning financial decisions. After I hung up, I walked through my house, turning on every light. I needed to think, and I couldn't do it in the dark. They'd been laying groundwork, building a case. Jessica's cruel comment at my birthday wasn't spontaneous meanness. It was part of a plan they'd been executing for weeks, maybe months. The next morning, I drove to the library. I'd always been good with computers, something that surprised people my age. I settled at a terminal in the back corner and started researching. Guardianship proceedings, elderly financial abuse, signs of dementia used in court. What I found made me sick. Case after case of families manipulating elderly relatives, using claims of mental decline to gain control of their finances. The pattern was always the same. First, establish financial dependence. Then, document supposed incidents of confusion. Finally, petition for guardianship. I printed everything I could and stuffed it into my purse. Then I drove to the coffee shop across from David's office and waited. At 12:30, he emerged with a colleague. I followed at a distance as they walked to the deli 2 blocks away. I couldn't hear their conversation, but I could see David showing his phone to the other man, both of them looking serious. When they sat down, I positioned myself at a nearby table, hidden behind a menu. My mother's really declining, David was saying. Yesterday, she completely forgot she'd been paying our mortgage for 2 years, just completely blanked on it. His colleague shook his head sympathetically. That must be hard to watch. It is. And the thing is, she's got substantial assets. The house, investments, life insurance. Jessica thinks we need to start managing her finances before she does something really damaging. Have you talked to a lawyer? We have an appointment tomorrow. Jessica's been documenting incidents for weeks now. Times Mom seemed confused. Repeated conversations. Forgotten commitments. We want to make sure we have enough evidence if it comes to a competency hearing. My hands clenched around my coffee cup. Evidence. They were building a case against me based on lies. The hardest part, David continued, is that sometimes she seems completely normal. Like this morning, she seemed sharp as ever. But then an hour later, she couldn't remember our conversation about the mortgage. Because there was no conversation about the mortgage, you lying little weasel. I left before they finished lunch and drove straight to my lawyer's office. Thomas Brennan had handled Robert's estate and our business affairs for 20 years. If anyone would know how to protect me, it would be him. Margaret, good to see you. What brings you by? I spread the printed articles across his desk and told him everything. The messages I'd seen, the canceled payments, David and Jessica's reaction, their conversations with neighbors. Thomas listened without interrupting, his expression growing grimmer by the minute. They're building a guardianship case, he said finally. Classic pattern. Create financial dependence, then claim incompetence when the victim stops paying. Can they succeed? If they have enough documentation of supposed incidents, and if you don't have representation, yes, guardianship proceedings are designed to protect vulnerable adults, but they can be manipulated by people who know the system. My chest felt tight. What do I do? First, we document everything. Every conversation, every phone call, every interaction. Second, we get you a complete medical evaluation from an independent physician. Third, we restructure your assets to protect them. Restructure how? Trusts, primarily. If your assets are in a properly structured trust, they can't be touched even if someone gains guardianship over you. I felt a spark of hope. How long do we have? Based on what you've told me, I'd say they'll file within the month. They're clearly in a hurry. That evening, I sat in my kitchen making lists. Every bill I'd paid for David and Jessica. Every loan that was never repaid. Every time Jessica had made cutting remarks about my age or mental state. Every conversation David had steered toward my finances or my future. The pattern was clear once I looked for it. They'd been setting this up for years, slowly increasing my financial involvement in their lives, while simultaneously undermining my credibility. But they'd made one crucial mistake. They assumed I was the confused, helpless old woman they'd been painting me as. I picked up my phone and called Thomas back. I want to set up those trusts, I said, and I want to do it tomorrow. Margaret, are you sure? Once we do this, there's no going back. I thought about Jessica's smirk when she'd talked about measuring me for a casket, about David's lies to his colleague, about the web of deception they'd woven around me while I'd been busy trying to keep our family together. I've never been more sure of anything in my life. The next morning, while David and Jessica were meeting with their lawyer to discuss my supposed mental decline, I would be 3 blocks away signing documents that would ensure they'd never get their hands on a penny of what Robert and I had built together. But first, I had one more phone call to make. One that would tell me just how deep their betrayal went. The phone call I made that night changed everything. I called Emma's preschool, not to cancel payments this time, but to ask a simple question that had been nagging at me since my conversation with Thomas. "Hello, this is Margaret Hayes. I've been paying tuition for my granddaughter Emma. I was wondering, has anyone else from the family contacted you recently about her enrollment?" There was a pause. "Actually, yes. Mrs. Hayes, Jessica, called yesterday asking about our policies for children whose guardians might be changing." My blood turned to ice. "Changing how?" "She mentioned something about you potentially needing care and wanted to know what documentation we'd need if she and her husband became Emma's primary emergency contacts and financial responsible parties." They weren't just planning to take control of my finances. They were already positioning themselves to take over every aspect of my life, including my relationship with my granddaughter. "I see. Thank you for letting me know." After I hung up, I sat in the dark for a long time. The house felt different now, like it was holding its breath. Every creak of the old floorboards, every tick of the grandfather clock Robert had inherited from his father, it all sounded like a countdown. But instead of fear, I felt something else entirely. Clarity. The next morning, I was waiting outside Thomas Brennan's office when he arrived at 8 o'clock. "Margaret, is everything all right? They're moving faster than we thought. We need to act today." Inside his office, I told him about the call to Emma's school. His face grew grim as I explained how Jessica was already establishing herself as my potential replacement in every area of my life. "This is more serious than I initially thought," he said, pulling out a thick file. "They're not just building a guardianship case, they're preparing for complete control. Financial, medical, social, everything. What do we do?" Thomas spread several documents across his desk. "We create an irrevocable trust. Your house, your investments, your bank accounts, everything goes into the trust with you as the primary beneficiary. Even if they succeed in getting guardianship, they can't touch trust assets. And Emma? We can set up an educational trust for her that bypasses David and Jessica entirely. If something happens to you, the money goes directly to Emma's education, with an independent trustee managing it until she's 18. I stared at the papers. This wasn't just about protecting my money anymore. This was about protecting my granddaughter from parents who saw her as leverage in their scheme. "How long will this take?" "If we work fast, we can have everything signed and notarized by this afternoon. But Margaret, once we do this, there's no going back. Your assets will be protected, but it also means you're essentially declaring war on your own family." I thought about Jessica asking the school about changing guardians, about David lying to his colleagues about my supposed confusion, about the 2 years of financial support I'd given them while they plotted my downfall. "They declared war first," I said. "I'm just finally fighting back. We spent the morning restructuring my entire financial life. The house went into the trust, my investment portfolio, my savings accounts, even the life insurance policy that had Robert as the original beneficiary and David as the secondary. I changed it to benefit the trust instead. Thomas had brought in a notary, and by noon, I had signed away direct control of everything I owned. But in doing so, I had ensured that David and Jessica would never be able to touch any of it. "There's one more thing," Thomas said as we finished. "We should consider getting that medical evaluation we discussed, but not from Dr. Morrison." "Why not? If David suggested him, there's a chance they've already spoken to him. We need someone completely independent. I know a geriatric psychiatrist who specializes in competency evaluations, Dr. Sarah Chen. She's impossible to manipulate." That afternoon, while David and Jessica were probably meeting with their lawyer about guardianship procedures, I was sitting in Dr. Chen's office taking cognitive tests that proved my mind was as sharp as it had ever been. "Mrs. Hayes," Dr. Chen said as we finished, "I have to say, your test results are excellent. Memory, reasoning, problem solving, all well within normal ranges for someone your age. Actually, better than normal. So, if someone were to claim I was mentally incompetent? Based on this evaluation, I'd testify that such claims were unfounded. You're clearly capable of making your own decisions about your life and finances." I walked out of her office with a sealed envelope containing my evaluation results and something I hadn't felt in months: confidence. But I wasn't done yet. That evening, I called David. "Hi, honey. I've been thinking about what you said yesterday, about getting some help." "Oh," his voice was careful, controlled. "What kind of help?" "Well, I did some research, and I think you might be right. Maybe I should see someone about these memory issues I've been having." I could practically hear him holding his breath. That's great, Mom. Really smart. I made an appointment with Dr. Morrison for next week, just like you suggested. Perfect. Jessica and I can drive you. That's sweet, but I can manage. It's just a routine appointment. After I hung up, I sat back in Robert's chair and smiled. Doctor. Morrison's appointment was real. I'd made it that afternoon. But not for a cognitive evaluation. I was going to ask him about the conversations he might have had with David and Jessica about my mental state. If they'd been setting this up for as long as I suspected, there would be a trail. Phone calls. Questions about my health, maybe even suggestions about what signs to look for. The next morning brought a surprise. Jessica showed up at my door unannounced, carrying a casserole and wearing the kind of smile that never reached her eyes. Margaret, I brought you some lunch. I noticed you haven't been eating much lately. I hadn't been eating much, but that was because my appetite had disappeared along with my trust in my family. Still, I let her in. That's very thoughtful, Jessica. She bustled around my kitchen like she owned it, putting the casserole in my refrigerator and making us both tea. I watched her carefully, noting how she seemed to be cataloging everything. The medications on my counter, the bills on my desk, the general state of my housekeeping. You know, she said, settling into a chair across from me. David and I have been talking about how hard it must be for you, managing this big house all by yourself. I manage fine. Of course you do, but wouldn't it be nice to have less responsibility? There are some lovely assisted living communities nearby. We could look at them together. Assisted living. There it was. The next step in their plan. Get me declared incompetent, then convince me to choose a facility where they could control my access to the outside world. I'm not ready for that, I said quietly. Oh, I know. Not yet. But it's good to plan ahead. And in the meantime, maybe we could help you with some of the day-to-day things. Bills, appointments, that sort of thing. I can handle my own bills. Jessica's smile tightened just slightly. Of course, but you did forget about our mortgage payment and the car insurance. David's been worried about what other bills might slip through the cracks. I looked at her sitting in my kitchen, in my house, planning my future like I wasn't even there. This woman who had told my neighbor I should be measured for a casket was now offering to help me manage my life. You're right, I said suddenly. Maybe I do need help. Jessica's eyes lit up. Really? Yes. In fact, I've already started getting help. I hired a financial advisor to handle all my bills and investments, and I'm getting a complete medical evaluation to make sure everything's okay. For just a moment, Jessica's mask slipped. I saw confusion, then something that looked like panic. A financial advisor? When did you do that? Yesterday. They're taking over everything. I won't have to worry about forgetting payments anymore. But Margaret, you should have discussed this with us first. We're your family. Are you? I asked, meeting her eyes directly. Because family doesn't usually discuss measuring each other for caskets. Jessica went very still. I was joking. Were you? She left shortly after that, and I knew the real battle was about to begin. That night, my phone rang. David's voice was tight with barely controlled anger. Mom, Jessica told me you hired some financial advisor without talking to us. That's exactly the kind of impulsive decision we've been worried about. Is it impulsive to get professional help managing my finances? It is when you don't discuss it with your family first. We need to meet with this advisor. Make sure they're legitimate. I almost laughed. They were worried about someone else taking advantage of me. That won't be necessary, David. Everything's been handled properly. Mom, I'm coming over tomorrow. We need to talk about this. After he hung up, I realized they weren't just planning to take control of my life anymore. They were panicking because I'd taken steps to protect myself. Tomorrow's conversation would determine whether my strategy had worked or whether I'd just made myself a bigger target. David arrived the next morning with Jessica and a man I didn't recognize. The stranger carried a briefcase and had the predatory look of someone who made his living off other people's misfortune. Mom, this is Mr. Peterson. He's a lawyer who specializes in elder care issues. Elder care issues. The euphemism made me sick. I invited them into my living room. The same room where they'd sat just days ago expressing their fake concern about my mental state. This time, there was no pretense of worry. Their faces were hard, determined. Mrs. Hayes, Peterson began, your son and daughter-in-law are concerned about some recent financial decisions you've made, hiring advisors without family consultation, making dramatic changes to your accounts. I'm entitled to manage my own finances as I see fit, of course. But when someone shows signs of cognitive decline, impulsive financial decisions can be indicators of diminished capacity. Jessica leaned forward. Margaret, we're not trying to take anything away from you. We just want to make sure you're protected. Protected? From what? From maintaining control of my own life? I had a complete medical evaluation yesterday, I said calmly. Dr. Sarah Chen found no evidence of cognitive decline whatsoever. Peterson's eyebrows rose. Dr. Chen? She's very thorough. However, we have documentation of concerning incidents over the past several months. David pulled out a folder. Mom, we've been keeping track of times when you seemed confused or made unusual decisions. Forgetting about the mortgage payments, canceling insurance without explanation, not remembering conversations we'd had. I looked at the folder in his hands. My own son had been documenting what he claimed were signs of my mental decline. The betrayal was so complete, so calculated, that for a moment I couldn't breathe. May I see that documentation? Peterson nodded to David, who handed me the folder. I opened it slowly, reading through page after page of alleged incidents. Dates, times, detailed descriptions of conversations that had never happened, behaviors I'd never exhibited. According to this, I said, my voice steady despite the rage building in my chest. I forgot David's birthday last month. You did? Jessica said quickly. You seemed confused about the date. Interesting. Because David's birthday is in September. This says I forgot it in March. I looked up at them. Unless there's something about when my son was born that I'm not aware of? Peterson frowned, glancing at David. There might be some discrepancies in the dates. There might be some lies in this entire folder, I said, flipping through more pages. This entry says I wandered outside in my nightgown at 3 a.m. and Mrs. Patterson found me confused in her yard. That's right, David said, but his voice had lost some of its confidence. I reached for my phone and dialed Mrs. Patterson's number. She answered on the second ring. Helen, I have some people here who claim you found me wandering in your yard in my nightgown last month. Is that true? There was silence. Then Helen's confused voice came through clearly. Margaret, what are you talking about? I've never seen you outside in your nightgown. That's absurd. I hung up and looked at the 3 faces staring at me. Would you like me to fact-check any other entries in this file? Peterson was studying the documents with new interest. Jessica's face had gone pale. David looked like he wanted to disappear into the couch cushions. There seems to be some confusion about these incidents, Peterson said carefully. The only confusion here is that my son and his wife have been fabricating evidence to support a guardianship case against me. I closed the folder and set it on the coffee table. The question is why? Jessica found her voice first. Margaret, you're twisting everything. We're trying to help you. By lying about my mental state, by creating false documentation, by convincing my neighbors I'm losing my mind, I stood up, and something in my posture made all 3 of them shift uncomfortably. By telling a preschool that Emma might need new guardians? Peterson's head snapped up. What's this about the child? Asked Jessica. She called Emma's school to inquire about changing guardianship arrangements. The lawyer turned to Jessica with sharp eyes. Did you discuss the minor child with third parties regarding potential custody changes? I was just asking hypothetical questions. That could be considered child endangerment if the grandparent isn't actually incompetent, Peterson said coldly. He was clearly reevaluating his clients. David tried to regain control. Mom, regardless of these details, we're still concerned about your recent financial decisions. The trust you set up, the advisor you hired. What trust? Peterson asked. I smiled for the first time since they'd arrived. The irrevocable trust that now holds all my assets. The one that ensures David and Jessica will never have access to a penny of my money, regardless of any legal proceedings they might pursue. The silence that followed was beautiful. Peterson looked like he'd swallowed something bitter. Jessica's mouth opened and closed without sound. David just stared at me like he was seeing a stranger. You can't do that, Jessica whispered. I already did. Yesterday. Everything is protected now. The house, the investments, the insurance policies. Even if you somehow manage to get guardianship over me, which you won't, you'd be guarding someone with no accessible assets. Peterson stood up abruptly. I think there's been a misunderstanding here. Mr. and Mrs. Hayes, perhaps we should discuss your situation further in private. After they left, I sat alone in my living room, surrounded by the remnants of their failed ambush. The folder of lies sat on my coffee table like evidence of their true nature. My phone rang an hour later. David's voice was raw with anger. You've destroyed this family, Mom. All we wanted was to take care of you. By stealing everything I own, it wasn't stealing. It was protecting you from yourself. I almost laughed. David, do you hear yourself? You were planning to have me declared incompetent based on fabricated evidence, and you think that's protection? You don't understand the pressure we're under. The bills, the mortgage, Emma's expenses. You needed my money. My house. My life. The truth hung between us like a blade. Well, congratulations. You've taught me exactly how much my family values me. Mom, please, we can work this out. No, David, we can't. You made your choice when you started documenting lies about my mental state. You made it when Jessica called me a walking corpse at my own birthday party. You made it when you decided I was worth more to you dead than alive. I hung up and turned off my phone. For the first time in 3 years, my house felt peaceful. The grandfather clock ticked steadily. The afternoon sun streamed through windows that belonged to me, and I knew that no matter what David and Jessica tried next, I had won. They could hate me. They could cut me out of their lives. They could tell Emma lies about why Grandma didn't visit anymore, but they would never take anything else from me, and that was enough. 6 months later, I stood in the kitchen of my new apartment at Willow Creek Senior Community, making coffee for one and feeling more content than I had in years. The decision to sell the house had been mine alone. The trust allowed me to do whatever I wanted with the proceeds, and what I wanted was a fresh start somewhere David and Jessica couldn't find me. My new home was smaller but perfect, a 2-bedroom apartment with a view of the community garden and enough space for the furniture that mattered. Robert's chair sat by the window where I could watch the sunrise. The family photos were gone, replaced by pictures of the garden club I'd joined and the book club that met every Tuesday. Mrs. Patterson had helped me pack. She was the only person from my old life who knew where I'd gone. "Are you sure about this? Margaret?" she'd asked as we wrapped my good china. "Helen, I've never been more sure of anything." She'd hugged me tight. "You're the strongest woman I know." The morning routine here was peaceful. Coffee, toast with honey, the newspaper that actually got delivered on time. No phone calls about late payments. No unexpected visits from people who saw me as an ATM. No walking on eggshells around family members who were documenting my every word for future use against me. At 10 o'clock, I walked to the community center for my volunteer shift. I'd started helping other residents write letters and organize their paperwork. Turns out, my experience with financial manipulation had made me something of an expert on protecting vulnerable seniors. "Margaret, thank God you're here," called Dorothy from across the room. She was 83 and sharp as a tack, but her nephew had been pressuring her to sign over power of attorney. "Can you look at these papers my nephew brought?" Something doesn't feel right. I spent an hour helping Dorothy understand that her nephew was essentially asking her to sign away her independence. By the time we finished, she'd decided to consult her own lawyer. "How did you know?" she asked. "Experience," I said simply. At lunch, I sat with my new friends, women who'd chosen this place not because their families pushed them here, but because they wanted community on their own terms. We talked about books, gardening, current events, normal conversations with people who saw me as a person, not a bank account. That afternoon brought the weekly phone call I'd started looking forward to. "Hi, Grandma." Emma's voice still made my heart skip. David and Jessica had tried to cut off all contact, but Emma was 8 now and had memorized my new phone number. She called from her friend's house after school. "How are you, sweetheart?" "Good. Daddy says you moved away because you were sick, but you don't sound sick." "I'm not sick, Emma. I moved because I wanted to live somewhere new. Can I visit you?" My throat tightened. "Maybe someday, when you're older." "I miss you." "I miss you too, baby. But remember what I told you. Sometimes grown-ups make decisions that seem sad, but are actually for the best." After she hung up, I sat quietly for a moment. Losing daily contact with Emma was the only price I regretted paying for my freedom. But I knew that someday, when she was old enough to make her own decisions, she'd understand why I'd had to leave. That evening, Mrs. Patterson called with news. "Margaret, you'll never guess what happened. David and Jessica's house went into foreclosure last month." I felt a flicker of something. Not satisfaction exactly, but a sense of justice. "What happened?" "Apparently they'd been counting on your support to keep them afloat. When that stopped, they couldn't make their payments. Jessica's working at the mall now, and David took a second job. And Emma? She's fine, still in the same school, but word is, they've learned to live within their means." After we hung up, I walked out to my small balcony and looked at the stars. Robert would have been proud of me, I thought. He'd always said I was stronger than I knew. The woman who'd let her family exploit her for 2 years was gone. The woman who'd cried alone after her birthday humiliation had found her voice. The woman who'd been willing to bankrupt herself to keep her family happy had learned the difference between love and enabling. I wasn't bitter anymore. Bitterness required too much energy, and I had better things to do with my time. I had a life to live, friends to make, books to read, gardens to tend. I had peace. And for the first time since Robert died, I had myself back. Tomorrow, I would wake up in a place where no one saw me as a burden, an ATM, or a problem to be solved. I would make my own decisions about my own life, surrounded by people who respected my choices. That was worth more than any family that had to be bought with mortgage payments and silence. That was freedom.